the fifth in this 10-class series. In the previous four, and we're going to finally finish with the Zionist movement and continue to the actual Jewish settlement. Okay? So we know that Herzl did not invent Zionism. Zionism goes just one second. Zionism goes considerably before Herzl, and active Zionism started at least 10 years before Herzl, as the two organizations in Russia, Bilu and Chivat Zion. Okay? So, although he did not invent Zionism, he was very much responsible for its growth and development and its acceptance, the acceptance of political Zionism in the Jewish world and by the world at large. You know, it started with the Ottoman Empire, and then continued with the British acceptance, and then worldwide, at least recognition. He managed to surmount opposition from all the varieties, actually, of Jewish leadership of world, which were all against the Zionist ideas initially. Okay? Both religious and secular. And eventually he made Zionism a household word. Before that, it was an existing and somewhat growing organization within the Russian Empire. But with Herzl, it became much more than a utopian movement. The first Zionist Congress took place in Basel, Switzerland, in 1897, so 18 years after the founding of the Russian Jewish organization. So this marks that year marks the beginning, not 1897, beginning of active political Zionism. But at that founding already at that founding of the Zionist organization came the first split in the organization. Typically Jewish, also typical for the left, we say, that kind of splintering, but this wasn't a left-wing organization, a Zionist organization. So, one of the delegates to the first Zionist Congress was, at the time, well-known Jewish writer, some of you may recognize the name, named Israel Zangwill.
Yeah.
Okay? He was a British Jewish, English Jewish writer, and he attended the Congress, as I said, but before attending the Congress, he founded his own proto-Zionist organization in London, which he named the Maccabees. He disliked Herzl, period. I'm saying he disliked him. I'm not talking about the differences of opinion. He had a personal thing about Herzl. But aside from that, there developed a very serious ideological difference between them. And it came to a head later in the second Zionist Congress, at which place Zangwill left the ZOA, the World Zionist Association, and formed his own territorialist organization. Okay, what's the difference between territorialism and Zionism? Anybody?
Zionists wanted it to be in Israel, the territorials would accept any place.
Anywhere available. And what was available?
Oh, boy.
I mean, what country was
Nothing.
available for Jews to take?
You
Well, the British
On the
urged them to take Uganda,
Uganda.
okay, which was
Uganda.
a new British colony.
Idi Amin
Sure.
was waiting.
Now, can you imagine? Now, you don't have to imagine too much because the organization was founded, it had a lot of relatively large membership in England and Britain, you know, but nobody came. Basically, it never became a mass movement. And can anybody think of why it wouldn't become a mass movement? The idea of going back to Zion, excuse me, is an old Jewish idea that's, you know, the Jews always thought of Zion, of the land of Israel, Eretz Israel, as their land of origin. There was an attachment. There was a Jewish attachment. And as for Palestine itself, the Jews went from being a majority before the Great Revolt against the Romans to becoming, as more revolts came, including the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was actually bigger than the Great Revolt, the so-called Great Revolt, you know, and several other smaller revolts. And with each one, the Jewish population of Palestine became smaller following each revolt. Many people just escaped once it failed because it never had a chance to succeed. Any of those revolts never had any chance to succeed unless you count on God's help, which didn't come. Now, so while the territorialist movement never became as big as important and as big as the Zionist movement, there was another Jewish national movement. And that was, yeah, you said it, you're right. That became a much more formidable opponent to Zionism. For a while, it was actually bigger than the Zionist organization, although while the Zionist organization was more worldwide, it consisted of many people both east and west. The organization I'm talking about was very strictly within the Russian Empire. So, I'll tell you a little bit about that organization. Remember, the Russian Empire is still the home to the majority of the Jewish people. The biggest the plurality of the world Jewish population, not the majority, the plurality was in Poland. And then there was Lithuania and Ukraine, all of which was part of the Russian Empire. Now there are other it's important to note there are other Jewish community in the Soviet, in what became the Soviet Union, and in Russia proper, the Asian communities, which are just as important but they were not counted because they were not Yiddish speaking. Okay? So,
yeah, exactly. Sephardim.
Only 1 month following the first Zionist Congress, another large Jewish convention took place. This time it was held in the Russian Empire, in the capital of Lithuania, Vilna. Okay? Which, as I said, was part of the Russian Empire at that point. Unlike the Zionist Congress, which was openly attended by thousands, you know, including the international press, this gathering was held in secret. Although the attempt was to have as many people as possible from as many areas of the Pale of within the Pale of Settlements. So this also declared a new Jewish national movement whose aim was to solve what was universally referred to by Jews and non-Jews as the Jewish problem. This new organization had a very bombastic long name. The General Jewish Labor Bund in Lithuania, Poland, and Russia. The name was actually Yiddish, but direct translation. Generally, you don't have to memorize that. It's simply known as the Bund. Or the Labor Bund sometimes, or Jewish Labor Bund. Now, the founders officially declared the Bund a socialist party. Remember, socialism was one of the streams that were going within the Russian Empire as an illegal opposition to the government. Now, so they claim that yes, there is a Jewish nation within the Russian Empire. Those are the Jews that live within the Pale of Settlements. Now notice, the Eastern Jews of the Russian Empire were not part of the Pale of Settlement. Okay? So those are Jews that live in places like, well, in the Caucasus Mountains, you know, and further east in the Asian part of the empire. Now, so the 7 months after this organization met, and it was no coincidence that happened around the same time. So 7 months later, in March of 1898, another very important founding convention took place. Not a Jewish one. That was the convention. I know you're probably the only one that know what the RSDP stands for.
Yeah.
The Russian Social Democratic Party. Okay? That was the original large socialist party that eventually split into Bolshevik and Menshevik, majority and minority. Only the majority was actually the minority, and the minority was actually the majority. But it didn't matter because the Bolsheviks won in the end. But initially, this is before the split. So that was the only socialist party, and it was, of course, highly illegal. So they had, as I said, they held their founding convention in 1898, in 1898. And the Bund participated in the convention as a recognized autonomous Jewish socialist party, which would be an autonomous part of the RSDP. It was represented by 13 delegates. Now, although the Bund was still an illegal organization, from its beginning, it was a very democratic, or internally, very democratic organization. All important decisions were made through the annual conventions, at which there would be a central committee. Each convention elected a central committee. So every year they elected a new central committee to basically be the leadership of the organization. Between conventions, there would be smaller conferences that with limited authority, but also could pass rules, decisions less important that didn't need to be postponed to the annual convention. So, the annual conventions continue to take place every year regularly In fact, later on, in 1917, following what happened early in 1917,
Revolution.
the February Revolution, the first Russian Revolution. Well, I'm saying the first because the 1905 revolution doesn't really count as a major revolution. But the February Revolution was the first Russian Revolution of 1917. And so in 1917, following the February Revolution, for the first time, the Bund held its convention, its annual convention, openly, legally, and in the capital, where Jews didn't used to be allowed. You know, no longer St. Petersburg, it was now Petrograd. Okay, city of Tsar Peter, Petrograd. Now, however, in 1902, so we're going back, this was in 1917, but we're still in the beginning of the century, of the 20th century. In 1902, there was a huge May Day demonstration, obviously an illegal demonstration. We're still in Tsarist Russia, pre-revolution. Following that illegal May Day march, the new governor of Lithuania, a Russian governor of Lithuania, don't be fooled by the German name, because a lot of Russian, there was mixture, you know, and there was a lot of Russians that had non-Russian names. Okay, so his name was Viktor von Val, the new Russian governor of Lithuania. He ordered all Jewish participants of the march caught, arrested, and flogged. Now, he specified the Jewish participant. Later that week, the same week, a young Bundist, a cobbler named Hirsch Leckert. Anybody here heard the name? Too bad. Not even you.
She did.
You know,
I did.
right?
Oh,
I figured.
here.
It's okay.
Marina.
Oh,
It's
you
okay.
do know about her? Yeah, because
I think I heard it from you.
well, he became a Jewish hero. Okay, but what did he do? He shot the governor. He assassinated the governor. Okay, after that flogging of several dozen Jews that they managed to catch. Leckert was tried by a military court, convicted, of course. He never denied that he did it, by the way, and sentenced to death by hanging. At his trial, he refused. He had a lawyer, and the lawyer wanted to plead for clemency because of the circumstance, and he refused to ask for clemency. And instead, he gave an eloquent speech on the dignity of Jewish workers. That was the only known incident of a political assassination by the Bund. Although it wasn't a Bund idea, it was a personal decision by Hirsch Leckert. Although the Bund opposed that kind of political act, Leckert became a folk hero, and not only for the Bund, but for the entire Jewish labor movement worldwide. Several Yiddish dramas and many poems have been written about him. Now, due to the still ongoing pogroms in Russia, remember, they continued they intensified after the 1905, the failed 1905 revolution, and got stronger following the 1905 revolution. So the Bund leadership eventually had to reach a similar conclusion to those reached by the Zionists, by Dr. Pinsker, if you recall. They concluded that since the Jewish workers have their own specific circumstances, unlike other workers in the Russian Empire, since their specific circumstances were different, they must form their own socialist movement. They also considered that the Jewish environment in general was more objectively receptive to revolutionary ideas. Why? Well, because of the position they were in unlike Russian people in opposition to the party, the pogroms were aimed strictly at Jews, and specifically at Jews. Now, as those circles spread throughout the Pale of Settlement, they actually had an influence on the RSDP. Although initially the RSDP was not happy to recognize a specific Jewish nationality with the Jews were recognized as a nationality in the Russian Empire and later in the Soviet Union. You know, in the Soviet Union, in the identity cards, under a nationality, it was never written Russian or Ukrainian, you know, it was always Yevrei, Jewish. The most notable person from the Bund that became very influential in the RSDP is a man named Julius Martov, who was became one of the leaders of the RSDP, although eventually, after the split, he became the leader of the Menshevik wing of the RSDP. So, the Bund now vied with the Zionist movement on its solution to the Jewish question. So far, we discussed, the development of the Zionist movement, and to a lesser degree, much lesser degree, the Bund, the competition to the Zionist idea. Although the Bund was strictly within the Russian Empire, where the majority of the world Jews still lived. So, now, I just said that they were at least equal in numbers, the membership numbers, and possibly bigger and much more active within the Pale of Settlements than the Zionist movement. Yet, the Bund today, what do we know about the Bund today? In Australia, there's a little group that still calls itself the Bund. In the United States, there's a very quickly aging group called the Workmen's Circle, which is the Bund. Which is the Bund in the United States. Yet, the Bund doesn't exist. Why did Zionism succeed and the Bund disappear? Any idea? Anybody? remember, the motto of the motto of the Bund was Deutet, Yiddish word. It's not a real word, actually. The English word here, okay? Can you imagine ending in N-E-S-S, calling it hereness? That was the motto of the Bund. It's here that we create our Jewish nationality. So the Jews in the East don't count. Jews outside the Russian Empire don't count. This is where the bulk of the Yiddish, so this is the home of the Yiddish-speaking Jews. And indeed, the vast majority of the Yiddish-speaking Jews lived in the Russian Pale of Settlement. So, the Deutet means that they had to be there. And they were there when pretty much the entire Pale of Settlement was taken over by the Germans during World War II. So, we discussed the two phases of the Zionist movement, beginning by practical Zionism, you know, in the Russian Empire, and the political Zionist movement founded by Herzl. So let's look at what was happening in the small but growing Jewish communities, of a Jewish community in singular, of Palestine. So, during the late 1880s, in the beginning of the first Aliyah, and I'll give you another handout, which is very important for the rest of this this discussion, for the next 5 classes. So, the time of the first Aliyah, so let's say the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, that was the time, well, mostly the late 19th century was the population of Palestine. Remember, I noted before, since the Great Rebellion, the Jewish population of Palestine had been growing smaller as things got worse for Jews in Palestine. So Jews kept escaping to Europe, to the east, to what was then the Sassanid Empire, the Persian Empire, So the Jewish population kept growing smaller. It reached its smallest at the end of the 19th century. Now, and then came the first Aliyah. Now, even when it's at its smallest, you need to be aware, because that's the problem between our story and the Palestinian Arab story. We were always part of the fabric of Palestine. Jews were always, I shouldn't say we, because not me, but there had been villages in the Galilee. I'm talking about towns or cities. There have been villages that have had Jews working the land in the same villages since before the destruction. Pekin is one of them that stands out, because that's the largest one. Today it's a town, but it wasn't the only one. So the Jews were always part of the fabric. During the Crusades, the Jews formed their own units within the Muslim armies fighting against the Crusaders. The Crusaders were outsiders. The Jews were not. The defense of Haifa during the First Crusade was strictly by Jews. Haifa was a walled town at the same, a fairly small town, not a big city that it is today, but it was a port. But with the first Aliyah, there was a beginning of a growth. So with this, I need to give you this. You need to be aware of the numbers in this table. Here, you take the whole thing. So, all right, so let's look at this small table. Immediately following World War I, the entire population of the Ottoman Palestine, west of the Jordan River. Remember, under the Ottoman Empire, what is today Jordan was part of Palestine, as it was part of Eretz Israel in the traditional land, so-called land of Israel. Because the land of Israel, as it was pretty fluid. Anyways, so following the war, the entire population of the Ottoman Empire west of the Jordan was a little over 750,000. You can see the exact number on this table. As you can see, the Muslims constituted the majority of the Arab population. The Arab population was definitely by far the largest. Okay, so the Muslims constituted the majority of the Arab population, but so this is immediately following World War I. But on the eve of World War II, with the total population of Palestine being at 1 million, well, I have it as 1,764,520. I usually, when we talk about numbers over 1 million, I usually don't trust numbers that don't end with 3 zeros, because I can't imagine that the count was to the last baby, you know. But in any case, it gives us an idea. It was about 1 million, 1.75 million, approximately. The Jewish population had grown to over 500,000, 31% of the population, of the total population. So you can see that while the numbers of both, if you look, follow the tablet, the numbers of all of the entire population was growing. So the numbers of the Arabs were growing as well, not just of the Jews. But because of the Aliyah, the Jewish immigration, the percentage of Jews in that population was the only one that was really growing. In other words, the Arab numbers were growing, but not the percentage, due to Jewish immigration. So the Jewish percentage was growing. And you can imagine that fact was not lost on the Arab leadership in Palestine. So we noted that until the First World War, the Zionist movement's hopes relied on reaching an accommodation with the Ottoman Empire, right? Herzl met with the Grand Vizier and with the Ottoman Sultan. Under the Ottoman rule, remember, Palestine was not a province, it was a sub-province. The province was Syria, or what we currently refer to as Greater Syria, which included, aside from Syria proper, what is currently Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan, and Palestine. But in 1913, something happened in Istanbul. a militaristic faction of the Young Turks within the army, within the armed, I should say armed forces, not armed. They were called the Committee of Union and Progress. Usually it's in history books, it's just referred to with capital C-U-P, CUP, but it's Committee for Union and Progress. That group seized control of the Ottoman Empire. The government that they formed is known as the government of the Three Pashas. Everybody's familiar with the term Pasha. Okay, so in Arabic, by the way, it's still being used currently, although in Turkish has the letter P, as Arabic does not. So P in Arabic is usually pronounced as B. So in Arabic it would be called Basha. In any case, the Grand Vizier was Talat Pasha. Didn't even put the name on the board because we don't need it. We won't have to mention it again. But he became the acting head of state, the Grand Vizier, meaning in modern terms, prime minister. But the minister of war was Enver, or vizier of war was Enver Pasha, but the one that's important for us was the minister of the navy. His name was Ahmed Kamal Pasha, but in Arabic he's known more by his Arabic title, the Arabic form of his title, which is Jamal. Kamal means camel. Jamal is camel in Arabic. Okay? But so Abdul Nasser was also Jamal, that way, same name. Okay? So it's not considered bad name. Okay? It's not like calling him, well, a donkey or a pig. God help you if you refer to somebody as a pig. Aside from being the minister of the navy, he was the de facto governor, the de facto ruler of Syria. That included Palestine. And this military triumvirate ruled Turkey continued to rule Turkey throughout World War II. Throughout World War I till 1918. Now, the Three Pashas exercised absolute control over the Ottoman Empire. It's from 1913 to the end of 1918. And that's when the British and French troops occupied Constantinople. It was the Three Pashas who brought the country into, closer to Germany and signed the Faithful Pact, under which Turkey fought in conjunction with the European Central Powers, okay, against the Allies. Okay, the Three Pashas during that time were the leaders that initiated the Armenian genocide. Okay, so you know that about 1.5 million Armenians perished in the Armenian genocide. All of them civilians. They didn't have an army. Also, under the rule of Jamal Pasha, let me just not skip. Under the rule of that triumph of the three pashas, the Jews, well, the Armenian genocide constituted a kind of a warning light for the Jews. Because they knew where that kind of, what they saw happening to the Armenians is what they escaped from. Okay? And when Jamal Pasha, with his rule of Greater Syria, the Jews' fears seems to become imminent. From Damascus, he exercised complete control over Greater Syria. And
What year was the Armenian genocide?
I'm sorry?
What year was the Armenian genocide?
It started after the turn of the century, but it reached its peak during the war, in the beginning of the war in 1914.
May I add something?
Yeah.
Years ago, when we had Barnes & Noble in West Bloomfield, there was a book review, and the woman was May Jadarian, telling about the memoir she had written about her mother.
Yeah, the name is a typical, anything ending with I-A-N is a
Any of
typical
those names are.
Armenian name.
So
yeah.
I missed the book talk, but they gave me her number, and I called her. And that was one of the first books about the Armenian genocide, because I said, what Armenian genocide? And at that time, it was barely known. There was no literature
Especially to Jews.
Why?
whatsoever.
Why do you think?
Nobody cared about it.
Because Turkey is a member of NATO. Well, before that, on the eve of World War II, Turkey got much closer to the West. It was not part of it was neutral in World War II, but it was certainly much closer to the West than and they wanted to keep them allied with the West. And the Turkish governments, all the Turkish governments to date, denied that there was such a thing. And who wanted to make them angry? So, to make them want to leave. So, it was all, to date, the Turkish government forbids, wherever it can, the use of the term genocide. People died in the war. Lots of civilians died in the war. They don't admit, and there's no question that it happened, that they collected civilians and took them on death marches until the vast majority of them died. Yeah.
Were the Armenians Christian?
Yes.
Yes.
But, yes, they were.
They're right.
But they were not the only non-Muslims in the empire, in the Ottoman Empire. They were specifically designated because they were an Armenian nation, and there was no question about them being a separate nation. Yeah.
I was going to say the Armenian church is the oldest Christian church in Europe. It predates Roman Catholicism. Right. But the genocide went basically from 1915 till the end of the war, till Ataturk. I don't know if you're in it, but Ataturk took over. Yeah, it's worth mentioning. I just wanted to mention, however, in World War II, Turkey was neutral. Turkey had a very large Jewish population, They had about 250,000 Jews lived in Turkey. The Nazis asked the Turkish government to expel them and turn them over to the Nazis. Turkish government refused. Hitler then said, if you don't turn them over, we're going to come in and get them, and the Turkish army mobilized. And Turkey had the largest standing army in Europe. They had an army of 8 million men, and the Nazis backed down. They did not want to fight the Turks.
Right.
So they
didn't want to add another power.
That's right. So the Turks at that time saved 250,000 Jews.
Right.
Wow, I didn't know that.
But it was pretty clear despite the German threat, that they weren't really going to attack Turkey. And
Yeah,
I
well,
think
yeah,
the Turkish
right.
government counted on that.
Right.
Counted on that.
Canada.
So,
Natan?
under orders of, yes.
Natan?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to add that, Armenian genocide was very well known. Maybe it was
Yeah,
not known
absolutely.
here in Soviet Union because Armenia was part of the Soviet Union.
Absolutely.
And we, dealing with Armenians, knew it from the first hand,
Of
They
course.
still hate them. There is still this animosity, even
Right.
person to person.
Oh, absolutely.
So it is
Absolutely.
well-known
Very
thing.
much so.
They didn't call it genocide at that time in
Right.
Soviet Union, but it was very well known.
Absolutely. And there was also no questions that the Germans took notes about how they did it and how the world did not react. Very important.
And those of us
And it didn't.
who are involved in Holocaust education fear it is the same loss of memory
Yes.
for the
Yes, absolutely.
Holocaust. And that's
That's
why
That's
right.
Holocaust deniers in the United States.
Right.
exactly.
So the Armenian genocide, with the Armenian genocide, the bulk of the Jews of Palestine, until then, Ben-Gurion insisted that the Jewish leadership in Palestine were what the Americans call a fez. In Turkish and Arabic, it's called a tarbush. Okay, it's actually a Turkish word, which actually means hat in Turkish. But Ben-Gurion, because it was kind of a national symbol within the empire, so they insisted that Ben-Gurion asked that in formal meeting they would wear a tarbush to show that whatever their national aspiration, they're loyal part of the Ottoman Empire. Once the genocide, the Armenian genocide became very well known within the Ottoman Empire, and most certainly by the Jews of Palestine. And then it became even more imminent, because in 1914, when the war began, Jamal Pasha ordered all the Jews removed from the two big cities of Palestine, Jerusalem and Jaffa. Okay, Jaffa was the only important port, the only serious port in Palestine, and Jerusalem was basically the capital of the region. So all Jews had to leave both those cities, and Jerusalem was a very important part of the old Yishuv, the pre-Aliyah Jewish community, and also the post-Aliyah. A lot of them are settled in Jerusalem. Jaffa was always an important city in Palestine from the ancient days, and until that point it had a large Jewish population, although a lot of them had been moving to the new city of Tel Aviv, which started out as a suburb of Jaffa until it swallowed Jaffa. In any case, aside from having to leave, all Jews had to leave Jerusalem and Jaffa. Aside from that, at the same time, all Zionist functionaries were ordered to leave Palestine altogether. Why? Where were they from? A lot of them, mostly from the Russian Empire, but the ones who were from the West were also part of enemy. Both the Russian Empire and the West were enemies as far as the Central Powers, which Turkey was aligned with at this point. So they were not to be trusted. So they were all ordered to leave. Now, for Jews, that would have been a catastrophe. Now, the thing about it is, in the extremely corrupt system, the extremely corrupt local government of Syria under Jamal Pasha, there was no way his decree could be enforced. Heavy bribes were given to local Turkish functionaries, and very few Jews actually had to leave Palestine. Most of them also stayed in Jerusalem and Jaffa. But what Jamal Pasha's decree did cause was that the last loyal Jews to the Ottoman Empire gave up on that. At that point, Palestinian Jewish volunteers Palestinian Jews, young Palestinian Jews started to volunteer to the British Army. And at the same time, a Jewish spy ring for Britain was formed, which supplied information to the British Army about Ottoman movements, Ottoman armed forces, army movement in the Sinai. The name of that spy organization was Nili. I don't think I put it on the board, but it's an acronym, N-I-L-I, which basically, in Hebrew it sounds just like a personal name. There are such personal names like that, women's name. But it was actually an acronym for the eternity of Israel. Israel doesn't mean a country. Israel is the people of Israel. The eternity of Israel is not, will remain forever. It's not an exact translation of the acronym, but that's what it means.
How do you say it?
Huh?
How do you say those words?
Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. Nun Yud Lamed Yud. Okay, so approximately 650 Jewish volunteers formed their own legion in the British Army, known as the Zion Mule Corps, and its commanding officer was a former Jewish officer in the Russian army. Now that in itself sounds like an oxymoron, being an officer, a Jewish officer in the Russian army. And it was kind of. I'll get a little bit more into it. His name was Joseph Trumpeldor. Now, everybody that taught any Jewish history is very familiar with it, I know. So, in Israeli law, both those the formation of Nili, the spy ring, and the formation of the Mule Corps are considered the first step toward what will eventually become the current Israeli Defense Forces. Now, the Zion Mule Corps suffered very heavy casualty. I hope most of you are familiar in general history of the very important World War I battle, the Battle of Gallipoli. Okay? So they suffered heavy casualties in that battle, in the Dardanelles Straits. Now, we have to discuss Trumpeldor a little bit more in length. He was, as I said, the commanding officer of the Zion Mule Corps. He's one of the most fascinating figures in at least modern Jewish history, probably in Jewish history in general. His father's name was Wolf, W-U-L-F, meaning wolf, Wolf Trumpeldor. He was a Cantonist. You familiar? Yeah. I don't think anybody else is. In the 18th to 20th century, the Russian officials would kidnap, literally, kidnap Jewish youths, and when I say youth, I mean as young as 11 to 13, and force them into the Russian army, train them into soldiers, and they served for as much as 40 years. 40. Okay, so he was, and they are referred to as Cantonists. In any case, Wolf Trumpeldor was one of those children that were forcibly recruited at a very young age. After serving, and he served with distinction as a good soldier, he served over 25 years, not 40, and won a Medal of Honor for bravery during the Caucasian War. Wolf Trumpeldor got a special dispensation to live in Russia. Remember, Jews were allowed to live in the Pale of Settlements, which were not part of Russia proper. He got a special dispensation. The term was a useful Jew. Useful Jews were allowed to live, and there weren't many. Okay? So our Trumpeldor, Joseph Trumpeldor, was therefore born in Russia, outside the Pale of Settlement, and his education was more a Russian education than a Jewish education. He lived in a city called Pyatisgorsk, which is in the North Caucasian region, right?
Pyatigorsk, yeah.
Now, despite the fact that he did not have much of a Jewish education, he was very self-educated in Jewish. He took an interest, and he was very interested. In 1902, he volunteered to the Russian army. And in 1904, what started in 1904? No, the Russo-Japanese War, right? So in 1904, during the Japanese siege of Port Arthur, he lost his left arm due to a shrapnel. Trumpeldor was under hospital care in Port Arthur, and after being released from the hospital, he received an offer to be evacuated and released from service. He refused. He chose to complete his full service, and he said, yeah, but I still have another arm. Okay. So, after the surrender of Port Arthur, he was in captivity by the Japanese. And you know, the Japanese won the war. And Trumpeldor spent his entire time in captivity on kind of home printing a Jewish newspaper for fellow Jewish captives. There weren't that many, but there were some. So, he also organized for them history, geography, and literature classes, you know, in which he emphasized the he was basically a convert to Zionism, and he emphasized the need for Jews to have their own land and their own army. When Trumpeldor was released from captivity, he moved to St. Petersburg. Now remember, he's allowed to live in Russia. When Trumpeldor, and then he received a decoration for bravery, including something the highest honor that you could receive, the Cross of St. George. And in fact, very unique. He was the only Jew that ever received that. And he was a very important part of what became the second Aliyah. So let me give you one other important okay, so, thank you. So these are the six officially designated 6 aliyahs to Palestine. Well, from Europe general. Obviously, most of them still came from the Russian Empire. Although the first aliyah was the only one of those aliyahs that included a large number of Jews from the east, from Muslim countries, from Yemen in that case. The first Yemeni Jews started coming to Palestine around the time of World War I, the beginning of World War I, which would put them toward the end of the first aliyah. In the beginning of the second aliyah. Now, the second aliyah was possibly the most influential aliyah to Palestine. It was the one that both David Ben-Gurion and Zev Jabotinsky, the two wings of the Zionist what became the two wings of the Zionist movement and continued that way to the present, That was the aliyah that, as I said, David Ben-Gurion, Zev Jabotinsky were part of. So was the second president of Israel, Ben-Zvi. Approximately 20,000 Jews immigrated in the second aliyah. Here it says 35,000. So I'm not sure which of us is. About 20,000 Jews immigrated from the Russian Empire to Ottoman Palestine during the second aliyah. Unlike the first aliyah, Bilu and Chibat Zion, the second aliyah was highly influenced by the Russian Revolution, the ensuing Russian Revolution, and therefore was ideologically more socialist oriented. The first aliyah certainly was not. So the farmers of the people that came with the first aliyah started working as field hands for becoming more established farmers of the first aliyah in those villages, which were now large villages of the first aliyah. Petach Tikva, Rishon LeZion, Chadera, etc. Yeah.
How did they all communicate? Did they have a common Yiddish language?
Yes.
That they all spoke?
I'm not talking here because this was we are now after the time of, just past the time of Ben Yehuda, when the Hebrew language was, But by the second Aliyah, the Hebrew language, when they came, they didn't know much Hebrew. The useful language was Yiddish, but it was becoming more and more Hebraized, especially as, first of all, Jews from the East were coming who never spoke Yiddish, and secondly, and by the way, most Jews from the West also never spoke Yiddish. They spoke German, but not Yiddish. So the first Aliyah became, they had no issue with becoming wealthy farmers, and having more people working for them. The second Aliyah were more socialist oriented, and when they started founding their own villages, they were either cooperative or communal. This is so you have the beginning, we'll talk more about that. We have the beginning of, the kibbutz movement. Dgania was the first one, but also the cooperative. Their villages, unlike the first Aliyah villages, were not completely, separate, each farmer unto himself. The second Aliyah villages were actually more practical in that respect. They were cooperative village. So every farmer didn't need to own. I lived in Moshav for quite a while. You didn't have to own your own large farm machinery. You had one for the Moshav, and it was being used for the entire Moshav. It's a cooperative. Each farmer has its land, but the land was being worked cooperatively, not communally, but cooperatively. In any case, while studying in St. Petersburg, Trumpeldor became very interested in Hechalutz, which was, at the time, the largest, it wasn't the only one, but it was the largest socialist Zionist organization within the Pale of Settlement. And, some of the leader, initially, the leaders were Ben Gurion and Ben Tzvi. Trumpeldor never completed his studies. He came to St. Petersburg for study. He never completed his study. He left the capital, gathered a group around him, and formed, in 1911, he formed a Garin. Everybody know, how many of you know the term Garin in Zionism? You know, don't you? No? Okay. The way youth, Zionist, especially Zionist socialist youth movements, they formed groups of within the same age group. So they started forming it with high school students. They formed a group, they referred to it as a shichva, a layer. That was the layer of, if you were in high school, 8th, 12th grade age people, So it was, each layer was an age group, a rough age group of the same, within 3 to 5 years, the same age group. When they, at a certain time, that age group had to, we are trained, we have learned, had to move. Now, it never happened that an entire shichva, to the last person, left and moved to Israel. But the people that agreed to now form an aliyah group, they refer to the group as a garin. A garin is actually a kernel.
Seed.
Okay?
You're right.
So, Trumpeldor formed a garin of Hechalutz with friends and fellow students, and they came to Palestine. They joined what was then the first kibbutz, the Dgania. when World War I broke out, being an enemy national, he couldn't stay in Palestine. He was not only he was an officer in the Russian army, remember. He left Palestine, he left for Egypt, but while there, he and Ze'ev Jabotinsky together, by the way, Ze'ev Jabotinsky was also at this point a fellow exile from Palestine. So together they developed a Jewish group that was the start of what I refer to as the Zion Mule Corps. So he was its co-founder and its chief officer.
What year was that?
What year?
What year?
Well, that was in 1915. He's, by the way, the Zion Mule Corps is considered to be the very first all-Jewish organized military unit in 2,000 years. Trumpeldor was wounded during the Battle of Gallipoli, and the Zion Mule Corps remained in Gallipoli throughout the entire campaign, the Gallipoli campaign, and was decommissioned there. Now, in 1918, following the war, Trumpeldor returned to Petrograd, no longer St. Petersburg. I'm almost done. So, for a short while, and began military training, decided to provide military training for a chalutz. Once in Palestine, Trumpeldor was one of the founders of an organization called Hashomer, the Guardsmen, okay? Which was the first self-defense organization of Jews in Palestine. As a leader of Hashomer in the Upper Galilee, Trumpeldor was stationed in a kibbutz, in a new kibbutz called Kfar Giladi, which included the command center of Hashomer at that point, their command center within the Upper Galilee, a local command center. And at that time, the Upper Galilee was isolated. The Upper Galilee had a very sparse Jewish population. Consisted basically, there were only 4 Jewish villages in the Upper Galilee, in the entire Upper Galilee. Let me see how, I'm very over time. I'm going to finish the Trumpeldor story next week, and then take it from there. But with Trumpeldor, we're getting into Jews fighting Arabs. All right, so yeah.
The first kibbutz was spelled out for me.
Degania. D-E-G-A-N-I-A.
Aleph.
Oh,
Aleph. Degania
No,
Aleph.
hold on. That comes much later.
Aleph Bet.
There's only one Degania
Oh,
at this point.
okay.
You say so.
Later, it became so big, and they thought a kibbutz can't have over 100 members. Nowadays, there's a kibbutz that has over 2,000 members. But at the time, they thought over 100 was way too much, so they decided to split into 2 kibbutzim.
Did they only count the men, 100 men?
No, are you kidding? This is a socialist movement.
Oh, okay.
Only the women.
It's fascinating.
Right.
All right, any other questions or